Have you ever felt lonely, even when you weren't alone? Not the kind of loneliness that comes from having no one around, the stranger kind. The kind where you're surrounded by friends, family, or coworkers. Everyone is talking, laughing, living in the same moment. Yet somehow, you feel like you're experiencing a completely different reality. You hear the conversation, but your mind has already wandered somewhere else. Someone mentions success, and you start wondering why humans tie their self-worth to achievement. Someone talks about an argument, and instead of choosing a side, you're trying to understand why people become defensive in the first place. Someone asks what happens after college, and somehow your mind ends up asking what makes a life meaningful. It's as if every ordinary conversation opens a door to a much larger question. And after a while, you begin to notice something. It's becoming harder to explain what's going on inside your own head. Not because your thoughts are impossible to express, but because they're difficult to compress. How do you summarize hours of reflection into a 30-second conversation? So instead, you smile, say, nothing, and keep the conversation moving. If this sounds familiar, you might think the problem is that nobody understands you. But what if that's not the real reason? What if the hidden cost of thinking too deeply isn't that you become misunderstood, but that you begin experiencing the world in a way that's fundamentally different from most people? Imagine two people standing in front of the same ocean. The first person sees beautiful waves. The second person sees something else entirely. They wonder how many civilizations those waters have witnessed. How many people stood on that very shore asking the same questions? They're asking now how something so ancient can continue existing while every human life eventually disappears. Both people are looking at the same ocean, yet they're not seeing the same world. This is something the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once hinted at when he wrote that every person mistakes the limits of their own vision for the limits of the world. Reality isn't only what exists around us, it's also what our minds choose to notice. And that's where everything begins to change. Most people use thinking as a tool. Deep thinkers often treat it like a place. They don't simply solve problems. They live inside questions. A simple comment becomes an hour of reflection. A passing interaction becomes an analysis of human nature. A single mistake becomes an investigation into identity, fear, and motivation. 2. Someone watching from the outside, it might look like overthinking. But from the inside, it feels like exploration. The problem is that exploration has an unexpected consequence. The farther you travel into your own mind, the fewer people seem to be walking beside you. There's an interesting paradox hidden here. Human beings are the most socially connected species on Earth. We built civilizations, languages, art, and technology because we learned to think together. Yet the very ability that allowed us to understand the world also gave us the ability to question it. And questioning changes everything. Think about a child. A child asks, "Why is the sky blue?" An adult gives an answer. The conversation ends. But some people never stop asking, why do we work? Why do we compete? Why do we fear failure? Why do we seek approval? Why does consciousness exist at all? Every answer creates another question. And eventually, they realize something unsettling. The more they learn, the less certain they become. This is exactly what made Socrates so unusual. While others claimed to possess wisdom, Socrates became famous for admitting the opposite. I know that I know nothing. At first, that sounds like ignorance, but it wasn't. It was awareness. He understood that knowledge doesn't simply provide answers. It exposes the vastness of everything we don't know. Imagine standing on the shore of an island. Every book you read, every experience you gain, every lesson you learn expands that island. But as the island grows, so does its shoreline. And the shoreline is where knowledge meets the unknown. Ironically, the more you know, the more unknown you can see. Perhaps that's why deep thinkers often appear uncertain. Not because they know less, but because they can see more possibilities than certainty allows. Here's the irony. Society often celebrates intelligence. We tell children to be curious, to ask questions, to think critically. But there's something we rarely mention. Curiosity has a price, because every time you question one belief, you lose the comfort that belief once gave you. Every illusion you outgrow leaves behind an uncomfortable truth. You begin noticing contradictions. You notice people saying one thing and doing another. You notice how often fear disguises itself as confidence. You notice how much of everyday life runs on habit rather than understanding. And once you've seen these things, you can't simply choose to stop seeing them. It's like noticing a crack in a wall. Before, the wall looked perfect. Now, no matter how hard you try, your eyes return to the crack. Awareness has a strange quality. It only moves in one direction. Once your perspective expands, it almost never shrinks again. And that's when many people begin asking themselves a question they never expected. Why does seeing more sometimes make me feel more alone? Because the answer has very little to do with intelligence and everything to do with the way the human mind is wired.